Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Intuitive Queens podcast. I'm your host, Mara Marchesi, aka the Intuition Queen. This podcast started with the intention to inspire as many people as possible. I really love listening to stories, and that's why I started to interview amazing people. And I wanted to share with everybody that it's possible to change your life. It's possible to overcome challenges, to overcome hurt. In this podcast, you will hear so many stories of people that have gone through deep struggles and major trauma, or simply overcame challenges in their life. And the intention is to inspire you, to reflect on your life, and to take action, maybe with me or maybe with one of the guests, or simply to just feel like you can relate to them and you're not alone. So, with this intention, I hope you enjoy the next guest.
Today we have a new special guest. Her name is Midnight Dufresne, and she is a psychic, intuitive on a spiritual path, living intuitively and working for spirits, and a lot of other things that Midnight you're going to tell us about.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on the show. One of the reasons why I wanted you on the show is because you do a lot of work about narcissism and relationship with narcissism. But before we get into the topic, I kind of want to ask you, what is your connection with your intuition? Are you obviously are intuitive because you're intuitive, psychic, and all of that? But I'm curious to know your relationship with intuition in your life. Were you always very intuitive? Is it something that you learned afterwards? How was that for you?
I think I first noticed something going on when I could tell when I was going to get a phone call from somebody or letters from people, things like that. And I felt that there was something there on a sort of psychic level. And then, but it wasn't until years and years later, I just kind of took it for granted that everybody was like that. But it wasn't until years later when I had a tarot reading done that the lady said to me, she said, "You're intuitive, but on a psychic level." And suddenly it just kind of clicked as soon as she said it. And I thought, that's it. That's what it is. It's kind of, it is intuition, but it's a little bit more than that. There's I can very easily step into somebody else's frame of reference.
Yep.
So I've recently started describing that as a psychic, intuitive empath, because I can completely sort of get rid of anything to do with me and step into the mind of another person, which is or that understanding. I can just even project myself into that mindset, which I think is why, because I then had a load of experiences, meeting sort of narcissistic types and psychopathic types, and I was able to just completely understand what was going on in their head, which was a good thing in a way, because I understood why they were behaving the way they were behaving, which was, enabled me to understand it and to forgive it and sort of release it. But then I realized that, yeah, I could very easily understand sort of the psychology of human behavior by stepping into that frame of reference.
Right. Yeah. And I think, I feel like we have a similar kind of way because I always been extremely intuitive. I didn't know about psychic until I started doing this work more when I became a coach and I started going deeper into the spiritual world, that I started having readings and people being like, "You're a psychic." I was like, "What? Like what? What are you talking about?" And I don't know for you, but for me, was kind of it was okay. Like I felt it was fine obviously I was intuitive, but to say I was a psychic, I felt like there was some sort of responsibility in saying that, and I only just accepted that and started talking about myself in that kind of way recently. As before, and as you do, like I also feel like people's energies, and I have visions of stuff. I can understand the background, and and a lot of other things. But to me, it was like, yeah, it's my intuition, until I realized it was more than that. But still, like, it was kind of like, yeah, but psychics are that kind of people that do this, and it's just so much more powerful than what I am. So, and then eventually I was like, no, come on. Like, also, a lot of readings and stuff, people are like, you're a psychic. I was like, okay. Does that feel like it was your journey as well?
Yes. Yeah, basically. I think that, yeah, there's the word psychic, it doesn't match up with how I saw myself. And yet I knew it was something psychic. But like you're worried to put that label on in case you're mislabeling yourself, in case
Yeah.
that's not the fit. But ultimately I had so many experiences like that I just accepted it in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you said that you felt like your intuition was the same as others, because I felt the same until I realized it wasn't. And even there, I was like, always at the beginning, especially, I was always kind of like, are they feeling the same? Like, and then I started to have feedback from, especially from my friends, which were, leaving me every day pretty much, and like, no, you have this ability, you have this, I don't have it. And then I started to see, okay, so this is not everybody else's as the same thing. And I guess it just gives you a little bit of confirmation that it's your power, and it's a superpower, and if you use it for the good, then it just helps you to move forward and guide you and whatever else.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Ultimately, I feel like people up the sort of empathic end of the spectrum do have that ability, to varying levels. And so it can inform you, if you're healing somebody, or, it's used in that capacity, isn't it? And that's the best way to use it.
You're doing work and you're doing research about narcissism, and you're doing some things. What made you want to go into it? You talked about having relationships with narcissistic people, but what exactly? Because for me, I don't specifically work on that, but I obviously attract a lot of clients that have that background. And I do understand why. It's because I have a narcissistic mother, and up until a few years ago, I had no idea how much that was affecting me in the way I saw myself, in the way I was not doing things in my business to avoid being seen so much. But I'm curious for you, what's your story there, and where you're going with the work that you do, and what is it that you want to create and achieve?
Yeah, there's a lot of people sort of working with narcissistic abuse and healing that. And I think that in the future, I will do some work around domestic violence in a community setting, definitely. So I have that desire to sort of set up some kind of community project, etc., something around that. But I'll wait for that to unfold, I think. At the moment, I've been wanting to write a book for a very long time called The Day I Met a Psychopath. And I think a lot of people have written books about their experiences and, things like The Narcissist Next Door and things like that. But what I really wanted to do was I wanted to sort of give an accurate overview of what I see as being the reality of human psychology. And a lot of people are starting to think this way now anyway, in that it does appear that there are certain people that are in control of maybe bigger organizations or financial institutions, etc., that might not have our best interests at heart. And I started to notice that there seems to be a bit of a divide between the sort of empaths and what I would term as a psychopath. And I define a psychopath as being somebody who has no empathy.
Right.
And so that is an umbrella for a lot of people, so narcissists included. And again, the terminology, of what the work done around psychopathy and psychopaths tend to look at serial killers and people like that, whereas actually that's not the case. A psychopath is somebody who doesn't have any empathy, and you're born with that to varying degrees. And I had met quite an extreme version of a narcissist. I didn't know what a narcissist was at the time, but after I'd had a dealing with him, I realized, sort of like bricks in the face, oh, I met a psychopath. That's why the whole thing occurred the way it did, because it was out of the blue. It was very sudden. It was very quick. He tried to take me down very quickly. And at the time I was full of love and light, and, I'd wanted to help people, and I'd moved to an area so I could study counselling, so I could really get out there and help, because I'd had previous experiences as well, things that weren't that great. And then I met this guy just when I was sort of trying to turn everything around from that. And it was really quite destroying. But social media wasn't such a big thing at the time. And so, because it was like 15 years ago and I wasn't really on it. Whereas now you look.
Also, I guess, even aside from social media, but also people weren't talking about those things.
No, I mean, everybody kept their mouths shut. And I mean, there were people around that could have said something that didn't.
Yeah.
So this lack of talking, and the fact that we're not taught to communicate our feelings even, I mean, the whole of society really isn't set up the right way. And I've been very aware of that. I think since I was a teenager, I just thought, what is going on this planet? It's all back to front and it's not right. And so, ultimately, fast forward to now, what my book is saying is, the apex predator is your psychopath, essentially, because they don't have any empathy, because they're a predator. And they're the ones who are naturally sort of gaining control of society. And I think there's more of us that have sort of evolved up the end of empathy to varying degrees, but there's more people, I think, that would agree if you spoke to them that it's not right. When you point it out, they want something different. Humans really are meant to live in community. It shouldn't have got as out of hand as it has. And, money and power and control has kind of encouraged the apex predator type to get to the top. So it's all about that. So I'm writing the book and I want people's stories about narcissists, because a lot of people think, oh, well, I met a narcissist, but they weren't a psychopath. But really, they are on that spectrum. The psychopathy is just the lack of empathy. So I'm wanting to sort of redefine it a bit, to get people looking around them and saying, yeah, okay, things need to change, because otherwise, the predator doesn't value the things that the empath values, not community, not respect, not celebrating the individual. And so you also see a lot of psychopathic systems as well. Anything that's going to squash your individuality and sort of put you in that place where you are uniform and there's no differences between you and you're easily controlled, that's a psychopathic system. And I think we can change that. I think there's more of us than there are of them. And I think that's what we will see now, is the sort of uprising of the empath.
Yeah, and I think that, because I think, like, I don't know, maybe it's because I do read a lot of stuff about it, because I'm still healing from it, and I'm dealing with a lot of clients in that situation, but not just clients. Sometimes it's just even friends hearing them talking, and you're like, just so that you know, or your boss or whatever. But I think that now there is way more I feel we are in a situation where there is sometimes a bit too easy to say that person is a narcissist, and some other times it's more like, oh, okay, yeah, now I see that that's the practical behavior. Those are the steps that they take when they do this and that. And so now, you're more informed, and even if you don't think you've met one before, you can kind of go online and be like, okay, so I don't know, how does a narcissist tries to date you? You know, how does a narcissistic mother or father behaves with the, you know, and you can kind of come up with a lot of different people telling you pretty much similar things. And then you can kind of make your mind up about the person you're dealing with, and if that person has that kind of traits. And I feel that it helps. But I also feel that there is still a lot of denial in saying, okay, yes, that's the kind of person. So I'm going to back off, or I'm going to distance myself. Of course, if you can. If it's family, it's a different story. You have to find a different way to do it. But let's say it's a friendship, it's a person you just started dating, someone you can take a distance from. I just feel that there's still this kind of like, yeah, but you mentioned before you wanted to help people. And I feel this is a thing for us empath. We feel like we can help because we are aware of what's going on. Like you mentioned all of this at the beginning, talking about yourself. You can feel, you can see, you can understand the patterns. And so you come from, and then especially for us, if we are healers, if we're coaches, we feel even more empowered because we have the knowledge, we have the understanding, we have the skills to be able to help someone. And that can actually be detrimental at some point if you're not, in my opinion, if you haven't done enough work on yourself to heal from a narcissistic relationship, because there's always that kind of trap that I want to help. I see what's going on. I can tell you this and that about it. And I can also tell you this is how you do it. So let me help you. And oftentimes that's where the narcissistic personality comes in and says, oh yeah, come in. And oftentimes then you realize when it's too late, you've gone in too far, and it becomes difficult to release yourself from that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your personal experience. Where did what was your first relationship with a narcissist, and what happened that made you want to study more and write a book about?
Yeah, I think it was pretty fascinating from the point of view of what happened. And yeah, I had no idea that, I mean, I had met I'd already had some pretty awful experiences, I think, in my life, but I must have thought that it was just few and far between. I think I thought I was just unlucky rather than how prevalent it seems to be, because even the sort of bullying at school that goes on is a sort of an early indication of what you're going to meet really later on in life. I think I thought those people would perhaps just get better, but they don't necessarily. But the relationship that I had with the sort of psychopathic guy was it was done and dusted within 5 months. He took a real exception to me because he was a real misogynist. He hated women, and he thought that they were just, I don't know, I suppose it's the loss of control that maybe that happens on a chemical hormonal level, in that a woman meets a man and the man responds in a particular way. Well, psychopaths don't like that, because that's a loss of control to them. That's somebody else controlling the way that they feel, and they take massive exception to that. So he was somebody that did want to destroy women and had thoughts of killing them and things like that. So he was up the sort of more severe end of the spectrum, and that's the sort of dangerous sort of type, I think. But I mean, I say that because your life can very quickly be at risk. For example, when I was in a situation where I was trapped in my where I lived by him, because he was just constantly projecting himself on me. So he was running around cheating with other women, and then he was saying, well, that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing. And it's like, well, actually, no, because I'm not like that. And I think that, you know, it's not that I was trying to be a good person. I think I am a good person. I have very strong values and sort of morals. And so he hated that and he wanted to destroy it even more, because he doesn't have that in him. So it's kind of like, how dare you be like that sort of thing. So there was a time when I was trapped. And I look at that relationship as sort of being a microcosm of other relationships that go on perhaps over a longer term, because, you know, and they can all be just as damaging. I mean, I went into sort of prolonged sort of fight or flight, and so had to deal with sort of complex sort of PTSD. But I think that can happen in so many different ways. And that's why really I want other people's stories, because it's not just about meeting somebody who's a potential sort of, you know, psycho killer. Because like you say, you can have a narcissistic parent and that person will equally destroy you. And you will stay in a state of freeze, too afraid to be yourself, because of the things that you can be told as a child, you know. And I grew up with a bully. My father was a bully, but I wouldn't call him a narcissist. He was just bullied himself, and didn't break the cycle. But it's all of that stuff. It's all of this violence and this harm that needs to change. You know, if you're going to start protecting the vulnerable, which is what good leadership is, then that starts with children, you know. And the amount of children that are in homes with the kind of man that I met, or just a damaging person, or a bully, or you know, the narcissistic type, doesn't really matter what category it falls under. It's happening and something needs to change, you know.
But also that is the reason why you keep on attracting people like this. And could be someone that you date, like my first boyfriend was a narcissist, not a crazy one, but once I learned a couple of things, it's like, oh, you know, the behaviors are very similar, obviously different from your mother, but you keep on attracting personalities that are very similar to one another. They feel better at the beginning, but in whichever way, at some point, they turn out to be the ones that tell you what you should or shouldn't be doing, the ones that lie to you, the ones that try to control you. And sometimes it's difficult to see it, because you always think that you're moving forward, and you're always thinking that, okay, I've gone away from that, you know, now I'm a grown woman, now this, now that, you know, my boss was just an idiot or whatever. And the truth is that you don't really get out of that cycle until you really understand why you're attracted. And you talked about your father, and so it makes sense to me that eventually at some point you met someone that has some sort of escalation of your father's problem, and to a point that was way too much. For me, it was the same, and I just realized that I attracted, the first time was a boyfriend, and then it was a boss, and then it was a friend, and then this situation kept going on. And when I started my business, all of the issues that having those sort of relationships kind of created within me, that I didn't necessarily know about, or I wasn't that conscious about, started to come up. And then that's when I started to do quite a lot of work, not knowing that I was doing work to release that part of myself. I thought I was working on, you know, manifesting money, or, you know, I don't know, releasing fear or whatever. And then to then realize everything is tied up to the fact that you really try not to be seen, and you really try not to upset anybody, even if maybe at that point in time in your life you have nobody to upset. Nobody will actually be upset. Actually, you're able to have relationships that cheer on you and support you, but that part of you that is wounded from those relationships is still there and is still kind of acting on your behalf.
Yes, and I mean, there's a lot in that you've just said, and I think one of the things I do want to do is make it kind of sort of present it in a different way, really, rather than saying, because it's quite a common thing to say that people attract this kind of relationship in, and I think it's slightly different to that, because don't forget, these people are predators. They are apex predators in a lot of cases. So a narcissist is a predator looking for prey, and a psychopath is even higher up than that. And that is all that they do. Their brain has become very, very adept, because they think strategically rather than emotionally. They've become extremely adept at looking for the signs and signals that you are going to invite them in. And an empath is the ideal prey for a psychopath. So that is what they are scanning for. So this is a lion that is surrounded by different animals, and he's looking for the rabbits. Yeah, he's going to ignore the ones that perhaps look a bit more confident, ignore the women that are perhaps a bit more closed off. So, but then the problem is if you haven't learned good boundaries, if you haven't learned to act on your intuition, because, my intuition instantly told me this guy was dangerous. And I didn't understand why, because I wasn't used to going, oh yeah, I'm right about that.
Right. Yeah.
I'm going to act on it, and I'm not going to let that person in. And then I go on my training, which is that, I must be polite. I must talk to this person. I must listen to them. I must empathize with them. So you will be picked by them rather than you attracting them. But then what you need to do is, when you sense those things, you have to then have good boundaries to walk away and say, well, I'm not going to entertain this person. It's not my job to heal this person. That's the really hard thing to do. And that's where the education needs to come in. And that's why I want to say to people, you're the empath, they're the psychopath, they're the predator, they're looking for you. And when they found you, because there's a lot of them, I mean, let's just say it was a 50-50 split. The odds are you're going to meet them.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not necessarily you attracting them in, but if you let them stay, then there's work to be done. And obviously, if you were damaged as a child, you wouldn't have learned the skills that you need to stick up for yourself, to value yourself. Yeah. And actually, it's a shame that you even need those skills, but you do, because you're in a world surrounded by predators. And that's really the message I want to get out.
Okay, so what are the signs for someone that might think they never met one, or they're not sure, or they're not aware? What are the signs that they can try to figure out to see, okay, yeah, maybe I'm feeling something weird? Because sometimes, it's like, I don't like this person. And then you try to explain to other people why you don't like the person, and you don't know how to explain it because there isn't an explanation. Just your intuition is just telling you, just don't connect with this person. So what are the actual signs that someone can actually think about and be like, oh, okay, yeah, I can see this and this and this. And so maybe I can listen to myself a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost impossible to tell, except, it's impossible to sort of verbalize it. So, I mean, I have heard of other people saying, oh, there's 7 different types of narcissists, and you've got this type of that type of that type of that type. You're not going to see those traits straight away. But what your brain is really good at doing itself is picking up on incongruency, right? So when somebody is saying something to you or behaving or acting or whatever they're doing, if they're coming from a genuine place, everything will match up. Everything will match up. All their body language, their eye movements, just everything. You know, if somebody speaks to you from the heart, it shows. If they're not, that's when you will start to feel a little bit uncomfortable. That's the point when you should say, this person probably isn't on my wavelength, probably isn't massively evolved enough for me. So I'm gonna be really cautious and see what the rest, you know, let's say you did meet somebody on a first date, because these people are going to be really charming and really nice, but it will be hard for them to be genuine. It'd be really hard for them to be genuine unless they are very well versed at it. And the more well versed at it they are, the more level of psycho you've got. But genuinely, it's actually quite hard for them to mimic emotion because they don't have deep emotions. You know, they've got rage, they've got anger, they've got all the narcissistic stuff of this person shouldn't be talking to me that way. And that's, you know, but their emotions are really shallow. So it's really hard for them to act with any depth. And you will pick it up naturally. You will. You've got those skills because that is actually your empath side protecting you from somebody who is a predator.
Yeah. So basically, just listen to your intuition and ask yourself questions.
Yeah.
And I agree. I think that we'll always know when there is something weird. And the thing is, we don't necessarily need to have a explanation right there and then. It's just about, okay, so I'm not feeling comfortable, or this person just said that, but feels like they
Yeah.
don't mean it, or whatever.
Yeah.
But there is that kind of inner knowing that something is off. You don't necessarily need to have a full description of what is not right. You just have to listen and maybe give yourself time to then figure that out later on if that's necessary, or just not. You can just let go of the person if that's, you know, depending on the situation. For people that might be having relationships with narcissistic people that are in the family or in situations where you can't really just say, I'm not going to work, or psychopath or things like that. What do you suggest someone does to protect themselves and to kind of find a way to have a balanced relationship, if that's even possible?
Yeah, it's very difficult, isn't it? I mean, sometimes it means distance.
Yeah.
So I remember a counsellor saying to me that he'd met people that had moved to Australia, and then he would meet their parents, and then he would understand why. It might be a case of physical distance, but it's really about looking at yourself, isn't it, and saying what can I handle and what can't I handle? You know, I'm really important in my life. It's all about my life. How do I value that? And what boundaries am I going to put in place? And it really is about less time with somebody who is damaging you, and a bit of distance. And that can take an enormous amount of willpower. So again, it would be working with a therapist or a coach, and putting yourself first, and learning that putting yourself first, you know, and not absolutely killing yourself and your health and your mental health and everything else, because that'll impact your physical health for another person. Because if you're, you know, I mean, it's different if you're a carer for somebody and all that sort of stuff, you know, that's a very different situation. But if somebody is, you know, playing mind games with you or using you as their scapegoat or whatever, then it's time to say, no, time out. You know, you only get, I'm not going to say you've only got one life, because you've probably got multiple lives, but you've only got this one as the being that you are.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to be done on this planet. You're entitled to enjoy your life in any way that you see fit, and live it in any way you see fit. Although I think we're in a time of building community, but really you're on a healing journey. You know, that's why you came here. In my opinion, it's to heal. And often it's healing from these people that are playing another part in your life to help you heal. And it's really about healing and getting back in touch with yourself, self-love, all those things. Just got to engage all of that. But I mean, I would recommend working with somebody and getting that validation of what you need to be doing.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, because you mentioned, distance, and I did distance myself because I moved country, not because of my mom, but because I wanted to move country. And still that relationship was still affected me in a lot of different ways. And I had to do some really deep healing on the way I saw myself and the fears that I had, because even though I'm someone that does a lot of work on myself and I'm always learning new things and new modalities or whatever, I had no idea that I was that fearful about really being seen. And that came through for me only when I moved back briefly for like a year and a half during the pandemic. And in my idea, I was like, I'm going to stay a couple of months. I'll find a place, and then I'll move to my place, and I'll be working from Italy. And that never happened, because I went back to my narcissistic mother, and she switched completely. And when I moved back, when she started behaving like they do, I then realized that I had such a big fear that she will always sabotage my life, because that's what she always did. And that clicked, and I was like, oh, this is the thing that I was trying to figure out, and the reason why I was doing or not doing certain things, and how that affected me in a lot of different areas of my life. And I went then into deep healing for that, to release it. And you change as you move forward, and you learn to be you without permission from them and things like that. But it really is about figuring out that part of you that needs to heal, and what exactly you need to heal from. Because for me, that was my fear, but I know for a lot of other people it's different, because everybody has a different experience. So you need to find your own personal way to understand yourself, and then heal and release and move on. And for a lot of people, it means not having any more content, because it's not possible. Even if you have healed and you've done the work, sometimes the other person doesn't want you to, and will never really accept, and will always try to destroy you in a way. And you have to put that distance.
Yeah, and that's a reflection of their own shallow sort of affect, in a way, isn't it? And I don't know if that person is really capable of any meaningful change, because it really is a sort of an evolutionary thing. And it might be that they just haven't had enough lifetimes. I really, it's an interesting thing to think about, in that when people that are more empathic sort of materialized in this realm, did we come here to kind of help the evolution of humankind, or have we progressed ourselves naturally? Or because if you consider yourself to be a starseed, then you've had lives on other planets, say, or you might have had lives on other planets. You might have had 100 lives here, and somebody else has only had a couple.
Yeah.
And so what ultimately is the reason for the situation where we've got now, where you've got these huge sort of disparities between the empaths and the sort of psychopaths? I mean, it's an interesting thing to sort of try and think about. But ultimately, there's a lot of us here that are repairing the damage done to us by the type that has, less empathy, less feelings. I mean, it almost makes me feel like we're different species in a way. But
Yeah, sounds like. Okay, so you said you're collecting stories of other people. Are you still collecting? Or yeah. Okay, so tell us how do we send our stories, or how people can send you a story? Do you have a process? How does that work?
So I have created a website, which is www.midnightdufresne.com. And on there is a tab for The Day I Met a Psychopath. And then you can just contact me on my contact form to submit the story. I have set up a Kickstarter, which I'm going to redo, and I'm going to prolong it. So I'm going to make it a much longer project. And I think I might turn that into some other interesting things, sort of on a creative endeavor, just to try and get that message out there in as many different ways as possible. So similar to, you know, the baby reindeer guy who actually did his story, you know, as a sort of a stand-up act at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. You know, there's so many different ways that these sort of things can be presented. So I'm gonna, I hate to say, have a bit of fun with it, but sort of really make it into something that's maybe a bit different to catch the attention of people in a perhaps a different way, because there's so much out there now. Everything is filled with narcissism and narcissists and everything else. And what I'm saying is slightly different. So yeah, so I mean, you can submit the story that way, and I really would love it to be really diverse and have stories from all over the world, and see how this is showing up, and just what we're facing here, and the damage that we're having to overcome, and the cost to society of that. Because if there's an actual cost, and this is something that really needs repairing because society's going to be better for it, then I really want to push that, because that to me is an obvious way forward and out of what we're dealing with. Because even the wars that are occurring, that's all psychopathic systems, and we don't want to see that. We don't want to.
And I think it's a good place to start, because we never think that big, but the truth is, at some point, someone is going to become someone in a place of power of that extent. So starting from where we're at the moment, and see what we can do, I think it's just the best way to go. So thank you for doing this.
Well, I mean, I think so many people are trying to do the same thing. So maybe we can all come together and make that real shift.
Yeah. Okay. So this is if someone wants to submit their story. Is there anywhere else where people can find you if they want to get in touch with you, or follow you, or anything like that?
So on Instagram, I am at The Day I Met a Psychopath, because that's the name of the book. You can also find me under Midnight Dufresne on Facebook, and the website will have other links. I think I've got one of those trendy link tree. It's not a link tree, but it's something like that. If you go to the website, then I will be putting I think it's bio sites, which basically tells you everywhere else that you can find me. Thank you.
Well, you will find all everything in the show notes, but then, like, if any other link that might not be in the show notes, you can find it there. And if you want to get in touch, feel free. And if you have a story, or maybe, I don't know, maybe you want to collaborate to create something different or bigger, always welcome. This podcast is for everybody that feels the need to listen to someone's story, to be inspired, to feel relatable, or to collaborate and do something. So let's spread the good work. And and thank you so much for being a guest on my show. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
What an amazing episode, right? I hope you enjoyed the guest that I had today. If you want to connect, just go to the show notes and you will find all of the links available. If you want to connect with me, you can either visit my website, theintuitionqueen.com. You can find me on Instagram as The Intuition Queen. And I officially invite you to join my Facebook group, which is called Intuitive Queens Network. And you will find amazing people there, and you can connect with me even more. All right. Thank you so much for watching and listening. I would really, really appreciate it if you could leave me a review or send this to someone that you feel might need to hear what we talked about today. All right. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week. Ciao.